Coming up on this Wednesday edition of Newsline at Noon, Korea strikes a deal worth $1.8 billion with Saudi Arabia to export 2 Korean-made nuclear reactors. It'll also work with the Arab nation to sell the technology to third countries. Senior diplomats from South and North Korea clash over Pyongyang's human rights abuses at the UN Human Rights Council meeting in Geneva. Plus, Israel's Prime Minister warns US Congress that the proposed nuclear deal with Iran will pave the way for Tehran to possess nuclear bombs, sparking a furious reaction from the White House. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon.
It's noon Wednesday, March 4th here in Korea. Thanks for tuning in. Live from Seoul, I'm Eoh Jin-joo.
It's very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broome. President Park Geun-hye is in Saudi Arabia on the second leg of her four-nation tour of the Middle East. On Tuesday, the Korean leader signed a number of agreements to expand the two countries' economic cooperation in the areas of nuclear energy, creative economy and healthcare.
The president and the large business delegation from Korea accompanying her will seek more lucrative deals with the Arab kingdom today. Choi San files this report from Riyadh.
Even though it's the biggest supplier of oil to Korea, Saudi Arabia is seeking new non-oil energy sources for its rising domestic power demand. Riyadh plans to build a dozen or more nuclear reactors that can generate 18 gigawatts of electricity by 2040. At Tuesday's summit between President Park Geun-hye and King Salman, Seoul and Riyadh signed a deal to jointly invest into studying the prospect of building at least 2 of Korea's small 100,000 kilowatt nuclear reactors in Saudi Arabia. When the reactor construction is finalized after 2018, Korea expects a $2 billion order and the world's first export of a small to mid-sized nuclear reactor. Nicknamed SMART for its name System Integrated Modular Advanced Reactor, the multifunctional reactor is about 1/10 the size of the more common type of reactor and can be used to generate electricity and desalinate seawater. President Park anticipated entering the global market with Saudi Arabia after constructing the reactors in the Arab country, then exporting them together to a third country. Korea also signed an agreement to share policies related to President Park's creative economy model in the form of innovation-based startups and centers to support them. Korea's SK Telecom, which runs one of the government's innovation centers, separately sealed a deal with a Saudi telecommunications company to export the conglomerate government startup institute cooperative model to the Arab nation.
Many state leaders have identified with our creative economy model and they've expressed an interest in forging a creative economy partnership.
Korean healthcare firms will also participate in a Saudi pharmaceutical complex project, and a hospital plans to share its medical technology with a Saudi cancer center. Choi San, Arirang News, Riyadh.
North Korea's top diplomat is demanding the UN Human Rights Council drop its resolutions on his country's human rights abuses. Lee Soo-young says the core testimonies of the UN Human Rights Report are based on the lies of criminals. Hwang Seung-hee reports.
North Korea's Foreign Minister Lee Soo-young used his platform to denounce a landmark UN report on Pyongyang's human rights abuses that was published last year. Addressing the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva on Tuesday, Lee called for the resolutions based on the report to be revoked immediately, since the core testimonies have been proven to be false.
The act of cooking up the report of the Commission of Inquiry based on lies of a few such criminals is itself a mistake, which is completely against the aspiration of the UN for civilization and the rule of law.
The recent backtracking by prominent defector Shin Dong-hyuk on the details of his life in a North Korean prison camp fueled the regime's attempts to discredit the entire UN report. Lee said the world body should also look into the CIA's harsh treatment of terror suspects.
The UN must put an end to its selectiveness on dealing with human rights issues by listing the US brutality of torture as an urgent issue.
But North Korea's claims were met with strong calls by South Korea to immediately end its human rights violations.
We call on the DPRK to immediately take concrete and sincere steps so that its people can carry on a normal, dignified life.
At a separate conference, the North Korean diplomat called the ongoing joint military drills between Washington and Seoul a rehearsal for a nuclear war against Pyongyang and threatened to launch a preemptive strike on the U.S. if necessary. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
A top U.S. intelligence official says countering cyber threats is Washington's top priority in terms of national security. In an interview with U.S. network PBS on Tuesday, Director of U.S. National Intelligence James Clapper also reiterated that he was confident that North Korea and North Korea alone was the culprit of the devastating cyber attack on Sony Pictures late last year. Clapper, who flew to Pyongyang in November to secure the release of 2 American detainees, added that he doesn't see change on the horizon for North Korea, but said he felt a slight optimism from the young people he saw there.
Now, a broad anti-corruption bill was passed at the National Assembly on Tuesday, but critics have already raised concerns the law's broad scope may make it unconstitutional. The intention was to enhance transparency in Korean society, but opponents to this bill argue that it went too far and limits people's basic rights. Ji Myung-gil has more.
A sweeping anti-corruption law will go into effect starting as early as September of next year, after an 18-month grace period. But critics are already calling for revisions. One problem, they say, is the law enforces a double punishment. Under the new law, a person who receives money or gifts worth more than 1 million won or $912 million as a bribe for a favor is subject to up to 3 years in prison or a fine of up to 5 times the value of the money or gifts received. Another problem is that the law does not have a clause that enables the punishment of those who asked for the favors or contributed the bribes. The spouses of public officials are also subject to the law. Law experts say this is a form of collective punishment which is banned by the Constitution. The law also strengthens the power of the prosecution, which has already been criticized for wielding its power excessively. The prosecution is often questioned on its motives for going after politicians or CEOs. Experts say that with the new law, that could become more common. It's also possible that law enforcement officials could exploit the law by launching an investigation at any time against individuals or the media if they are seen to be against the government. Some lawmakers have also raised concerns that the law is not fair, as it does not include civic groups, which are seen as the largest interest groups in society. The law was first aimed at rooting out corruption within the government, but has now been expanded to other people with public influence, such as teachers and journalists. The legal community has expressed concerns that the law is so broad and ambiguous that anyone could become the target of a criminal investigation. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
An area in Korea's western port city of Incheon is about to get a new lease of life with a little help from the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Dubai. The hope is that IT firms and educational institutions will transform the area into a so-called future city. Connie Kim has more.
It was once bustling with construction, but Komdan in Korea's western port city of Incheon has been lying idle with the sluggish real estate market. But there's welcome news for Komdan, as Dubai's government-owned fund is planning to invest $3.6 billion into the region. On Wednesday, the CEO of the Investment Corporation of Dubai gave a letter of intent to the mayor of Incheon, promising to build a global business city in Komdan. Now, this comes on the back of President Park Geun-hye's trip to the Middle East, where she's seeking deeper economic cooperation with the region. Dubbed the Future City Project, the government-owned investment fund will transform Komdan into a cluster of information and communications technology firms and educational institutions. The $160 billion fund is also behind the construction of similar cities in Malta and India. Although previous deals between Korea and Dubai for developments in Jeju and Paju have been scrapped, Incheon is hopeful as the CEO will be traveling to Incheon to sign the Memorandum of Understanding in 2 weeks. Kamdan was reportedly chosen as the ideal location for the project, given its accessibility to Incheon International Airport and the Seoul metropolitan area. This will be the fund's first project in East Asia, and it's expected companies will generate more than $900 million annually, breathing new life into local communities in the region. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Young Koreans are having the hardest time ever finding jobs these days, but it's not over even after they do get employed. The income of the households led by those in their 20s and 30s grew in the 0% range last year, seeing the slowest growth since 2003 when related records were first taken. Shin Se-min has the details.
Korea's younger generation, those in their 20s and 30s, are having a rough time in this period of slow growth. Youth unemployment is high, and those that have a job are finding that their pay isn't increasing much at all, especially compared to the salaries of Koreans approaching retirement. Statistics Korea says the income growth rate of younger Koreans hovered in the 0% range last year. The rate for people in their 50s? More like 7%. The slow income growth for the younger generation is also having another unwanted effect. They're having to take out more loans, with data showing the debt level of young homeowners rose over 11% last year. That's the highest in all age brackets. So it's even a troubling time for young Koreans in work, but a growing number of them don't even have a job. Last year saw hundreds of thousands of people to find work, but the youth unemployment rate actually had a record high of 9% in 2014. In other words, most of the newly created jobs were snapped up by workers in their 50s and 60s. And those young people with jobs often have to start their career on short-term contracts with little stability or upward potential. A recent survey shows nearly a fifth of young people who found work last year were on a contract of 1 year or less. Korea's finance minister Choi Kyung-hwan also addressed the unemployment issue on Wednesday. He said that while the official figures show more people are finding jobs, tackling youth unemployment is proving to be one of the nation's most pressing issues. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, Samsung Electronics is also jumping into the mobile payment service business. It has announced it will launch its own service platform in the second half of this year. Samsung Pay will be featured on the Korean tech giant's recently unveiled Galaxy S6 and Galaxy S6 Edge smartphones. Samsung plans to secure deals with 6 local credit card firms by the summer. It has already inked deals with several U.S. financial companies, including Visa and MasterCard. The company says its current plan is to focus on the South Korean and U.S. markets rather than the global market. The tech firm's inroads into the mobile payment services follows its acquisition of U.S. mobile technology firm LoopPay, which equips it with a mobile payment technology.
Korea and the United States have pledged to step up their cooperation in setting up policies in communications. The head of Korea's communications regulator, Choi Sung-jun, met his American counterpart Tom Wheeler on the sidelines of the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, where they agreed to push for policies on net neutrality, also referred to as open internet. This means making sure governments or internet service providers allow the public to freely access data or services on the internet. The two sides also agreed on the rising need to balance privacy and the benefits of utilizing things like the Internet of Things and big data. Korea's capital, Seoul, has been ranked among the top 10 most expensive cities in the world for the first time ever. The city was number 10 on the Economist Intelligence Unit's worldwide cost of living report, jumping 7 spots from last year. The top 5 remain the same as in 2014, with Singapore top, as you can see, followed by Paris and Oslo. Seoul's expensive clothing and food products was cited as pushing the Korean capital further up the list. In fact, clothing prices in Seoul and Singapore were found to be the most expensive in the entire world. The report evaluated some 160 products and services from more than 130 major cities, comparing them to a base index set to New York City. China has hit the key period of its political year with the start of two key meetings in Beijing this week. One big focus is how the country's elite plan to prop up China's slowing economic growth. Now, in the first of a three-part series on China's economy and its impact on Korean exports, our Kim Min-ji takes a look at the reasons behind the slowdown and also what's being done to turn it around.
After decades of breakneck expansion, the Chinese economy wound down last year to its slowest pace in 24 years. It grew 7.4%, falling short of the government's target of 7.5%. At this year's major political meetings, China is expected to lay the groundwork for further reforms to aid this period of slowing growth.
China isn't expected to record double-digit growth anymore given the size of its economy. Its exports and investment, which were once important growth drivers, are now seen as unsustainable.
China's exports have slumped in recent years due to sluggish global demand, and the country's heavy dependence on investments led to severe problems, including income inequality and an imbalance between consumption and investment. China describes the slowing momentum as the new normal, and efforts are underway to transform the economy to one that's driven by domestic consumption and services. The government has implemented various policies aimed at boosting consumption, such as accelerating urbanization, adopting universal health care, and easing regulations in the service sector.
China's consumption will start to rebound by 2020, according to our calculation. China's consumption will reach around 44% of GDP from the current 36%. By that time, Chinese consumption market will be $10.7 trillion.
Analysts see the slowdown in 2014 as a prelude to slower growth this year, as they don't foresee China's domestic-led growth to have an immediate impact. What's more, there are looming uncertainties for the global market, which is dependent on the Chinese economy for growth. And Korea is no exception, with China as its leading trade partner. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
And time now for a look through the global headlines we're following this Wednesday lunchtime from Seoul. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim at the News Center.
Eunice, in his address to U.S. lawmakers, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made his case that the emerging Iranian nuclear deal is, in his word, a very bad deal.
A very bad deal, that's right, Mark. He argues that the plan will not only help Iran develop nuclear weapons, but he also goes far as to say it could spark a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Our Park Ji-won tells us more.
Speaking before the U.S. Congress on Tuesday, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu stressed that the current nuclear negotiations between the U.S. and Iran will only help Iran develop nuclear weapons capability.
This deal has two major concessions. One, leaving Iran with a vast nuclear program. And two, lifting the restrictions on that program in about a decade. That's why this deal is so bad. It doesn't block Iran's path to the bomb, it paves Iran's path to the bomb.
The Israeli Prime Minister also warned the deal will spark a fresh nuclear arms race in the Middle East, threatening stability in the region. The speech received loud applause from Republican lawmakers, but Obama's fellow Democratic lawmakers expressed their discontent with the speech, and dozens boycotted the speech.
The invitation and the speech set a dangerous precedent whereby congressional leaders from one party can invite a foreign politician to publicly oppose the policies of the sitting president on the House floor.
President Obama defended the position of his administration, saying the Israeli Prime Minister didn't offer any viable alternatives, and this is the best deal possible.
If we're successful in negotiating, then in fact this will be the best deal possible to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Nothing else comes close. Sanctions won't do it. Even military action would not be as successful as the deal that we have put forward.
Obama refused to meet Netanyahu as the Israeli prime minister is facing an upcoming election later this month, and the visit could be seen as interference. Despite the Israeli prime minister's rejection of the deal, the U.S. and Iran are continuing their nuclear talks in Switzerland. The U.S. hopes to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon in exchange for a gradual lifting of economic sanctions. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Over to Iraq now, a military push to reclaim the strategic city of Tikrit from the Islamic State group continues for a second day. Officials report a slowed operation due to roadside bombs planted by IS militants who have controlled the city since June of last year. Iraq's Central Command Center said the most intense fighting is taking place in a town south of central Tikrit called Al-Dur, where IS militants are digging in with explosive-filled barrels and landmines. Some 250 families were evacuated on the outskirts of the mostly Sunni city as 10 soldiers and allied fighters were reported killed so far. And authorities in California are probing cases of so-called maternity or birth tourism, zoning in on businesses helping wealthy, expectant Chinese mothers to give birth in the U.S., thereby winning an American citizenship for their offspring. Federal agents raided dozens of locations early Tuesday, including those in the Los Angeles, Orange, and San Bernardino counties, executing search warrants and gathering evidence. While it is not considered illegal for foreign women to give birth in the U.S., authorities say they are investigating whether such businesses are coaching the mothers to commit visa and tax fraud. And finally, the most important event in the motoring calendar, the Geneva Motor Show, kicks off this week in Switzerland. And as usual, there are plenty of new cars on show, from the sublime to the weird and wonderful. Paul Yee has a rundown.
Sedans, trucks, compacts, SUVs, hybrids, and everything in between will be hitting the showroom floor this week in Geneva. Starting Thursday, leading automakers hope to win over drivers around the world via the 85th International Motor Show. In one of the show's first announcements, Volkswagen Passat was named Europe's new car of the year based on a vote of leading journalists across the continent. But aside from the awards, the conversation at the show has been dominated by the buzz that Apple is reportedly gearing up to introduce its own electric vehicle as early as 2020. In response, many traditional car companies are hoping to meet the challenge with their own array of tech-savvy features. Volkswagen, BMW, and Audi are leading the pack with better integration with smartphones and even smartwatches, while pushing the edge in autonomous driving systems. But analysts say these cutting-edge trends may take many more years before being adopted by mainstream consumers.
When you see the likes of BMW doing significantly well, continuing to talk about hiring more workers, VW also doing relatively well. And I think you see those mid-market brands, the GMs and the Fiats and Peugeots, perhaps continuing to be under some degree of stress.
The surge in research and development comes on the back of a recovering global auto market, largely due in part to high demand in the U.S. and China. The Geneva Motor Show is expected to unveil around 130 new models and concept cars during its 10-day run, giving a glimpse of the future of this ever-evolving industry. Paul Yee, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. It's beautiful outside under crystal clear skies, but it's cold out there as we have another brief cold snap ahead of spring, and the afternoon highs are expected to be 4 to 5 degrees lower than yesterday across the nation. In fact, it will feel chillier than the actual temperatures, and strong winds will drag down the sensory temperatures to a lower, and this strong wind advisory remains in effect for the most coastal regions. And taking a closer look at today's temperatures, the daytime high in Seoul will only get up to 2, while the top temperatures in Daegu will rise to 6 and Busan will will top out at 8 this afternoon. And as for the other regions, Jeju Island and Daejeon should see a high of 5 and 4, and Dokdo rises to 1. Now, these chilly readings will continue till tomorrow, so dress warmly tomorrow as well. And after that, we'll have spring-like weather this weekend. Well, that's all for me today, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Well, thank you very much, as always, Jian, for the weather, and those are the stories we're following at this hour.
Join us again at the same time on Thursday. Have a great day.